When I was 11 years old, my mom was diagnosed with respiratory issues. And for about 10 to 15 years, she actually lived on oxygen. So finally, when her lungs started to completely decline, it was transplant that was going to continue to help her live. That was her only option. So, after caring for my mom for so many years, I realized that caregiving was my passion. That's what I loved to do. I loved helping people. I loved spending time in the hospital with my mom and helping the other patients in the room with her. I absolutely loved it. So finally, in 2016, I went to school and got my personal support work certificate.
And do you think that your mom's experience with that double lung transplant, do you think that that really shaped you as a person?
It sure has. It really has. It's made me resilient in so many ways. I'm able to now bounce back from really hard situations. And, as a PSW, that's something that we have to deal with on a daily basis, whether it be we unfortunately lose a client or resident while we're caring for them, or we're helping a family that has a palliative care family member. These are things that we deal with kind of on a daily basis.
That's wonderful to hear how you've taken that really challenging experience and, you know, I guess helps put it towards something positive and serving others as well.
And that's the thing, growing up, I always wondered, why am I going through this? Why am I experiencing this? I'm a young child. Why can't I be out playing with my friends? And you know what? It all happened for a reason. Everything I went through, all those experiences, it shaped me into the caregiver and advocate I am today. So my name is Lindsay Couture. I am the owner of Oakwood Home Healthcare, and I'm also a personal support worker. Oakwood Home Healthcare offers in-home care and respite services to people here in the Durham region. Some clients I assist with mobility, some clients I assist with cognitive help. It all just depends on the client themselves.
How has COVID-19 impacted you and your clients?
COVID-19 has had a big impact on my clients and I. Some of my clients that I help with cognitive issues, mental health problems, I am no longer able to support them. Their families realize that their services aren't essential. They're not as essential as somebody who may need meal preparation or other personal care. So they've opted actually out of services during this time. It's hard because I know now the family has to step up and really play that caregiver role, which is stressful on them. I have been using Zoom a little bit to support these clients, but it's not the same as being face to face. It's not the same. So it has had a big impact. Another thing that I struggle with is being a private home care company. It's hard for me to get personal protective equipment. A lot of clients, they aren't protected. In my opinion, all PSWs, when they go into every house, they should be wearing a mask. We're dealing with some of the most vulnerable people in our society. Some of them are very immunosuppressed. And I mean, if they're doing their part and they're staying home for this whole self-isolation period, and us as PSWs, we're going grocery shopping and we're going into the stores. We should be at least protecting these clients when we're going in just to do their personal care.
What are the other issues you're hearing about from your community? Like, how has COVID-19 been impacting other personal support workers?
A lot of PSWs have been impacted differently. Some PSWs have actually uprooted their whole lives and they've moved to another location. They've relocated. So some PSWs from Kingston are here in Toronto, and I have friends who are actually PSWs in Niagara who are going out to Belleville area. So they're just they've uprooted everything to support as much as they can. Other PSWs have moved into campers or hotel rooms near their homes just so that they're not potentially bringing the COVID-19 home to their family members. And unfortunately, another way it's impacted some PSWs is it's actually taken their life. We've had 6 PSWs now pass away from COVID-19, unfortunately. And I really think that that could have been prevented if things were done differently.
As of June 3rd, that number has climbed to at least 8.
Yeah, and my thoughts go out to all those personal support workers and really all the frontline workers whose lives have been lost so far in this pandemic, and serving the rest of us.
It's upsetting, these people, they show up every day to take care of somebody else. They're not taking care of themselves. They're putting themselves at risk so that they can support the most vulnerable in our community. And the least we could have done was ensure that they were protected while doing their jobs.
How good of a job did our governments do at stockpiling personal protective equipment in advance of the pandemic?
I think the answer is quite evident. They didn't do a good job at all. I mean, when we had the pandemic over starting in China, why did we send such a mass supply of PPE over there, knowing that eventually it might come here? Also, all of the PPE that was expired from the SARS outbreak. I think things should have been done a lot different, but I hope the government has learned, if there is another pandemic, that things really need to be more organized. We've lost a lot of lives because of this pandemic, and especially in the long-term care sector. And the government has known about these issues in long-term care for years now. If something was done before the pandemic, I feel like the outcome would have been a lot different.
In terms of personal protective equipment, what are the Ontario guidelines for wearing PPE for frontline workers like yourself?
So everywhere is different. You hear PSWs tell different stories all the time. You have some PSWs that wear one surgical mask for a full 8 to 16-hour shift in long-term care. A surgical mask is no longer effective as soon as it becomes moist. So when you're wearing full PPE, when you're wearing a full gown and you're wearing goggles and a face shield, you're going to be breathing more heavier through your mouth. So I mean, in a sense, these PSWs, these healthcare workers, have a false sense of protection. I think that the healthcare workers that are working with COVID positive clients or residents should be wearing N95s, no questions asked. And I think that the PSWs that are just working with the regular clients and residents that aren't COVID positive, they should be wearing surgical masks just to prevent the spread, just to stop, just as a precaution.
And right now, for the majority of the time, they're not they're not following those protective guidelines.
And that's the thing is if the PPE is available, they're gonna follow the precautions more carefully. But when you don't have the PPE, there's only so much you can do. Like I was saying, the PSWs that are wearing the one surgical mask for a full 8 to 16-hour shift in long-term care right now, because a lot of them are working 2 shifts in a row, it's hard for them to follow the proper protocols, because in reality, if this wasn't a pandemic and we were dealing with an actual outbreak in long-term care, every resident would have a station set up outside of their rooms, like a whole setup with the gowns and the gloves, and they would have the masks, and you would enter, you would don the PPE, and as soon as you would come off, you would doff your PPE. You wouldn't wear the same PPE in everyone's room. It's almost like the standards that were put in place before the pandemic, so all of the standards and precautions you do for infection control, have just gone out the window, and now we're doing the complete opposite. No wonder the spread in long-term care is it's like a wildfire. Right now, most of the inspections in long-term care are being done virtually, online, through a video. And when they do send in a team to do an inspection, they're in full hazmat suits. Why aren't we giving our health, if this is that serious and we're sending these inspectors in hazmat suits, why aren't our healthcare professionals protected like that? You would never send a firefighter into a burning house without his oxygen mask and his fire hose. So why are we sending healthcare providers into their worst case scenario unprotected? It doesn't make sense to me. And as a result, we've had casualties. I hope the government has a plan to somehow support these families. I know some of these PSWs that have passed away had young children, and it didn't have to happen. My fear, during this whole COVID-19 pandemic, especially after personal support workers started passing away, was that the PSWs were going to strike. They were going to walk out of their job locations, whether it be in long-term care or in community. And that would have put the government in a really hard position. But that's not what PSWs do. That's not what we're here to do. We're not here to walk off the job, because our residents and our clients mean more to us than the money. If our clients didn't mean that much to us, we wouldn't have been showing up all these years. So it would be nice for the government to acknowledge all this hard work and really just support us through it, right?
Are you finding that burnout is a big issue with many personal support workers in your community?
So personal support workers came into this pandemic burnt out. That's one thing our profession is known for, is the burnout. Just because we do so much, we're asked to do so much, and there's only so much we're capable of. But us PSWs, we still provide and we still serve what has been asked of us. So PSWs now are beyond burnout, if there is even a point to that. I'm sure there is, but yeah, we're beyond burnout now, and that's the sad thing. There should be more support for PSWs. PSWs never should have came into the pandemic burnt out. This is a profession of over 100,000 healthcare professionals. Why is the largest healthcare profession not supported? None of it seems to make sense to me. The PSWs are the backbone to the healthcare system, especially in long-term care and in community care. PSWs make up for a lot of the employees for both. And so you think that we would be supported more. It took a pandemic for people to realize who we were. Why a pandemic?
On top of serving clients and running a business, Lindsay is the executive director of the Ontario PSW Association in Ajax and Pickering. Many PSWs come to her for support. Despite all of these responsibilities, her biggest concern is unrelated to work.
My biggest concern would be my mom here at home, because she is so immunosuppressed after her lung transplants that essentially this COVID-19 would take her life. And that is, to be honest, that has been my number one stressor this whole pandemic, is my mom. She's starting to get very, should I say, antsy. She no longer wants to sit at home and be stuck in these walls. So I've given her as much advice as I could give her, and there's only so much I can do as her daughter. But she has now chosen to go out into the community by herself, and that stresses me out even more, because how do I know she's taking proper precautions when she's in the community, right? So it's just, this whole COVID-19 has put so much stress on not just my life as a PSW, but also my personal life as well.
How are you managing, how are you coping with the stress of the pandemic personally?
I work out a lot. I go on a lot of runs. I just try and stay active and stay positive, as much as I can. It has its days where it's harder to cope. But I find that when I'm in those moods where I'm kind of downward spiraling, if I go for a run, I'm back into my happy mood. I get those happy endorphins going, and I'm good.
Spending time in nature has helped Lindsay endure the most challenging times in her life.
My mom had her transplants, and she was in Toronto General for 2 months and then in rehab for a month. If I wasn't at the hospital, I spent my time in nature, because there's just something so peaceful and so relaxing. It keeps your mind off of what's actually going on in life, and just for that moment you're focused on what's going on in front of you.
What recommendations would you have for the government to better support personal support workers like yourself?
I think the government really needs to work closer with the Ontario PSW Association and really figure out these guidelines. It's one thing to be making protocols and procedures when you don't work on the front line, but when you actually work on the front line and you experience things in real time, you see the difference, you see the gap. They also need to give PSWs an incentive. A lot of these PSWs, they work 2 to 3 jobs just to make ends meet at home. A lot of companies don't offer the full-time hours, so these PSWs don't have any healthcare benefits. They don't have anything. Another thing that's a huge issue is pay. Did you know PSWs make the same as somebody who's working at McDonald's? We make the same or less. And we're dealing with people's lives. So how does that make sense? We're now compared to people working in fast food joints and retail. More needs to be done with the profession before the profession collapses, and then the government finds themselves with a bigger problem on their hands.
On April 25th, the Ford government announced a $4 an hour temporary wage increase to a specific list of frontline workers that included personal support workers.
But not all PSWs are eligible for this. So if you are a PSW working in long-term care or in home care that is government funded, then you qualify. Or if you're in a privately owned if you're in a privately owned long-term care facility, you qualify. If you are a PSW working in a private home care company, you do not qualify for the pandemic pay. So they've really messed things up on this end, because when they first said it, they said that all PSWs did qualify for it, but now you have to be eligible in order to qualify, which isn't fair, because I mean, if you're a PSW working in long-term care, if you're a PSW working in home care in the government funded sector or in the private sector, you're still doing the same work. So why aren't we all equal? Now, I know why they've done this. It does make sense, because unfortunately some of the home care companies that are in the private sector are, shall we say, selfish. They would end up getting that pandemic pay from the government, and because it is a private company, it would be hard for the government to actually see where the money went. So this is the government's way of ensuring that the private home care companies don't pocket the money. I am a PSW in the private sector, so I don't qualify for the pandemic pay.
According to Lindsay, many of the issues facing the PSW community stem from a common source.
We need self-regulation. That's number one. We have an association, but they need the power to regulate us. We need to make sure there's more consistency in training. Some PSWs, they go to school at an accredited college, and I mean, they might not get the same training as somebody who goes to a community college. And so we need to really make sure that the training is really consistent across the board. It's the same with PSWs also that don't essentially, they shouldn't be in the field. I know I've had clients who've experienced personal support workers that have stolen from them, that have abused them financially or physically. And I mean, all they had to do was leave that company and move on to the next, because there's no record of it. When you're a nurse, if you were to ever be accused of anything like that, it would follow you. It would go onto your record. As a personal support worker, we don't have records. So if you were to commit neglect, let's say at one company, all you would have to do is move to the next and not use them as a reference, and that company would have no idea that ever happened. We need to make sure that we're getting rid of those PSWs. They can't be helping our most vulnerable people in society. That puts those people at risk, at a high risk. And so I really think the government needs to take into consideration self-regulation as number one. The self-regulation will follow with respect. We'll have more respect from our other interprofessionals on the healthcare team. There's a hierarchy. As a PSW student, I once said hi to a doctor. I asked them how they were doing. And after that doctor walked away, I had a nurse come up to me and say, PSWs don't talk to doctors. And I kind of looked at her like, what do you mean? We're all part of the same team. We're all aiming for the same success here. We want our residents and our clients to be taken care of. So, I think with self-regulation would come the respect from other healthcare providers. The one positive thing I can say is that this pandemic has brought a light to the PSW profession. And that is something that the association has been fighting for years. The PSW has been there for years. They have been supporting people in our community for years. And it's time that we almost repay back to the PSWs for everything they've done.
Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. And again, thank you so much for all the service that you and the rest of the personal support workers are doing, during the pandemic and during non-pandemic times.
It's my pleasure. I love what I do. I love supporting people, and I'm going to continue to do so, pandemic or not.
I'm in quarantine from COVID-19, at home staying clean, waiting on a vaccine, self-isolation, physical distance. If you don't, you threaten our existence. Here's a list of those at high risk, dying by the virus. All we got: heart disease, lung disease, hypertension, diabetes, give me your attention. Cerebral palsy, cancer, follow me, follow. There's only one answer: lay low, time to preserve. Stay home, flatten the curve. If you're asymptomatic, that's still problematic. Incubation, that's 14 days, son. Stay in your place, unless it's essential. 6 feet of space, where death is the potential. Whatever the weather, we're in this together. Lay low, yo, and stay the home.